Hello, I am Lynn Jones. I'm a doctoral student at the University of Strathclyde. A version of this presentation was prepared for the IPDA England Lightning Conference on the 25th of November 2023. Because of the timing, I shamelessly jumped on the 60th Whovian anniversary bandwagon. This is the director's cut of that presentation. In other words, it's longer than I had on the day. Now, I might not have two hearts like the doctor, but I'm at the heart of data analysis right now for my study. And different versions of past me keep materializing in front of my eyes. In this presentation, I briefly explain first why and second how I've undertaken the same data generation episodes as the people who have participated in my study. I'll also draw on my research journals and share some current understandings about the ways in which my identity has formed and reformed through the experience of researching teacher leadership. Bernard et al. Talk about the distinctiveness and uniqueness of professional doctorates because there's a nexus of established professional practice, emerging researcher practice, and also the reality of developing new practice for that professional context through the research process. So there's entanglement in 3 dimensions for every professional doctoral student right there. I am a primary teacher to trade. I'm based near Edinburgh. I identify as a teacher leader. Since being introduced to practitioner inquiry early on in a master's qualification over a decade ago, I have adopted an inquiring approach to my practice that has demonstrably informed and influenced some of the decision-making priorities, improvement plans in my workplace. I also have supporting roles on 2 national leadership development programs. So it's been what I feel is a natural step in employing that inquiring approach to that practice by doing a professional doctorate. So I am now researching how teacher leadership is understood and experienced in Scotland. And it was early in the process that a fellow EdD student asked me, so tell me again why you've decided to be doing the same data collection as your participants. And to be honest, I was a bit stumped because it simply hadn't occurred to me not to. It's one of the reasons I felt that I could do the research in the first place, because I'm part of the story. I'm investigating the lived experiences of teacher leaders in Scotland. I am a teacher leader in Scotland. I have data to contribute. So I've shared my data as a teacher leader, but I'll critically reflect on that data as an EdD researcher. I found it highly reflexive. It's been a way of me being very clear about my own stance, and it's been the opportunity for me to look at my own biases and assumptions in a practical way. Yeah, it's been a practical way of minimizing or trying to minimize my own influence on the data experience of others. I've captured mine. I've parked it. It's out of the way just now. It's not taking up as much headspace at least. And I can turn, my priority is the other people sharing their stories. And I know that I'll return to my own data later once data from other people has been generated and analysed. So that's my why. Summarised on the slide is how. So the data generation for the study has involved an online survey with only one question, one open-ended question, and two semi-structured interviews. So the survey was open to anyone working in the Scottish education system. And aside from a question about the sector you were working in, it comprised, as I say, a single open-ended question. The interviews were with individual educators who identified as teacher leaders, and these were variously mediated by online, visual, and mobile methods. So how this worked for me, before piloting the survey and before facilitating each round of interviews, I used the same tools to get as similar as possible an experience as the survey respondents and the interviewees would go through after me. I did that in order to generate data from myself about myself as a teacher leader. And only after the first cycle of analysis was complete on each subset of data generated by respondents or interviewees, so other people, did I then return to analyse my own data. And I adhered as closely as I could to the same requirements for each data generation episode. It wasn't without its problems, as I will explain. For the survey, though, capturing my response to a single open-ended question was fairly straightforward, as you might imagine. The requirements for interview 1, it was slap bang in the middle of the lockdown, so the interviews were done online in Teams. These were recorded, audio-visual recording was made. There was an interview guide, same one for everybody, and every interviewee was asked to bring an artifact that represented something about what teacher leadership meant to them. And each interviewee responded to a word cloud made up of 50 of the most common words from those online survey responses. And towards the end of the first interview, a mind map was created that summarised the key points made in that interview, with a view to reviewing that mind map in the second interview when we came back together. The requirement for the second semi-structured interview was a bit different. It was a walking interview, so outdoors in a place that related to the experience of teacher leadership for that person. An audio recording was made. Everybody was asked to explain why this particular place and space, how it related to the experience of teacher leadership. And again, there was an interview guide with 4 questions common to everybody, which were drawn from preliminary overarching ideas that had come from the survey and the first interview data in general. And then each person had 1 or maybe 2 personalised questions that pertained to their first interview. And then that mind map was updated and revisited. So myself, for the interviews, I responded to the interview guide and used the same methods. However, the main difference between my interviews and the other teacher leader interviews was that I didn't end up having an interlocutor either time. I talked to myself on both occasions, and I'm going to explain why. So for interview 1, the online interview, I did some technical run-throughs with my partner on a computer in a different room, and I naively thought that that was enough. I had the interview guide to follow, and I thought, well, the tech's working for me. It's going to be a bit weird, kind of recording and asking myself the questions and seeing myself on the screen all at the same time. But I think it was a bit of embarrassment, and if I'm honest. And broadly speaking, in terms of content, it did work. As I say, it was a bit odd speaking to myself, but it did become really clear that I would definitely need an interlocutor for the second interview, because it was a walking interview. The idea was that it was an experience to be undertaken together, two teacher leaders walking through or in or around a meaningful place with another teacher leader. So for interview number 2, unfortunately, the person I'd invited to be my interlocutor tested positive for COVID the day that we were scheduled to do it. The next day, I had scheduled my first interview with my first other interviewee. So there was a wee bit of time pressure to capture my data before going and getting theirs. Unbeknownst to me, however, while I was tramping the mean streets of Glasgow talking to myself, it turned out that interviewee number 1 was taking a COVID test that turned out to be positive too. So that interview had to be rescheduled anyway. I could have waited for my interlocutor to get well. I didn't know that at the time. So it was a bit problematic, and more so, I definitely feel the lack of having that other person for my second interview being it wasn't a proper dialogue. Even though I was answering the same questions, I definitely feel that I kind of let myself off in answering one question in particular. I think my somebody else would have pushed me that wee bit to extract the information. However, I was able to reflect on that in my trusty research journal afterwards and kind of explore the question in that setting. I'll tell you more about my research journal in a moment. So, yeah, it wasn't unproblematic, but ethically, I'm committed to transparency about my methods. So, I will write this up in my thesis. So, this question has been one of the guiding research questions for my study from the very earliest stage. In addition to the reflexive data from the survey in the interview, entries in my research journal, which I've been keeping since 2019, will also help address this question. The journal captures my researcherly learning over the course of time and the development of my researcher identity. And now that I've reviewed volumes 1 to 5 in chronological order with a critical lens for the first time in preparing for this presentation, I can see that I no longer agree with myself all the time and that my researcher identity has changed over the period. It's as if past, present and future Lynn kind of interact in the pages of that journal. And I've noticed examples of what Foote et al. Call disruptions to self-efficacy and interruptions to self-inefficacy. I don't know about you, but I much prefer the term self-inefficacy to the term imposter syndrome, not only because it demedicalizes it somewhat, it also makes it seem temporary and surmountable. So there's 2 excerpts from my research journal here. I wonder what you see in those words. Foote et al. Speak about 4 major disruptions to the self-efficacy of doctoral students. And it's disrupting the professional identity, the one that you've had the longest, that's more embedded, is likely to be more embedded for professional doctoral students. And it's these disruptions are mainly coming from internal rather than external sources. So those 4 disruptions are things like comparison to others, comparing yourself to others, expressing some kind of fear of the future, maybe, not knowing where you fit. And fourth one has been characterized as a fear of failure. In her work, Guccione suggests that the most common triggers to disrupting self-efficacy for postgraduate research students include the fact that they're needing to make choices in an unknown territory. And maybe it can be sometimes because they're encountering more open-ended learning process that they're unfamiliar with in this context. Candidates have a self-doubt, maybe, about their ability in the research to do research. And linked to that is these preconceived notions of complexity in the process, in the research process. Now, I would say that the quotes there on the screen from my journal definitely show uncertainty. In the longer entry from April 2022, I haven't got it all there, but in the longer entry on the 13th of April 2022, there were many more question marks and brackets around things and slashes, so there's alternatives. And my interpretation of that is that it definitely shows that I'm unsure. I'm hedging my bets about all sorts of things at that point in time. I'm wondering, have I used the right term? Maybe this word's better than that word, but I'll use them both just to hedge my bets. Not only have I used the right term, have I used the term right? Have I used it correctly? Or have I interpreted this situation or this reading accurately? Don't know. Shove it all down. Again, it's a way of capturing things, knowing that you're able to come back to them. And in that second episode, I'm actually shouting at myself using those capital letters as if, remind myself, don't forget, there's more than one thing at play here. And as I mentioned earlier, running counter to that disruption are these interruptions to that self-inefficacy felt as a beginner researcher, because that's your new context, that's your new identity, less embedded identity compared to your professional identity. So Foote et al. Suggests that that self-inefficacy can be interrupted by connecting with colleagues and peers, by sharing and presenting your work, and through self-reflection. And for me, those interruptions, kind of almost the validation of that newer researcher identity, have come through things like doing oral and poster presentations for conferences or showcases, taking part in informal writing groups with other PGR students, being the part-time EdD rep on faculty committees, peer reviewing proposals for multidisciplinary symposium at my university, being on the organising committee for event as well for PGR students. I just wanted to sneak in one more fairly clear example of change over time, where my learning and understanding through the process of doctoral research again means that I no longer agree with past Lynn about my identity. So you can see here, in 2019, I was definitely the researcher. I was working with participants. But then by 2022, we were all co-researchers together, co-researching. Earlier this month, I noticed that I referred to myself as a co-participant in my EdD, which by extension, that means that the other interviewees are co-participants too. Now, In 2022, I was characterizing interviewees, as co-researchers. That was bringing them into the research domain. Right now, I'm characterizing us all as co-participants. So that seems to locate us together in the practice domain, but participating in the research. That's where I am just now. It's not where I'm going to stay, I'm sure. References for some of the readings that have been helpful in my thinking about this so far, I've listed there for you. But really, if you're interested in keeping any aspect of this conversation going, please don't hesitate to get in touch via email or social media or in the comments below. Thank you very much for listening. Allons-y!